Welcome to the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and today we will be going over the rankings for week 2 of the fantasy football season. I do work from Half-PPR primarily. To begin, let me quick explain what we are looking at here, just a quick methodology of the rankings. I start out with the consensus rankings from Fantasy Pros, and go from there until I get my own projections up and running, which will take a few more data sets in just 1 week, probably week 4. So on the screen right here, these are the Fantasy Pros rankings. In green, I have highlighted where I have players significantly higher, or that maybe I at least wanted to point out. For the most part, I'm not going to point out if a guy is 2 spots behind here like Swift later on in the rankings. As the rankings go backwards, then the bigger it has to be for me to want to point it out. Red is going to be where I have a guy lower than the consensus by some sort of significant margin in my eyes. Also, over here on the right, these are a measure of the strength of the matchup, red being bad, green being good, based on the 2021 season. That is that. Let's just get a moving. There's a little bit of movement here in this top 10 that I wanted to make sure to point out. Starting out, we have Jonathan Taylor at number 1, Christian McCaffrey at number 2, Saquon Barkley 3, Austin Eckler 4. Can't argue with any of those. I don't believe in this matchup being the same amount of toughness this year, and I'm always going to be excited for Los Angeles Chargers versus Kansas City Chiefs game with the amount of points that we can expect to be scored in this game. So DeAndre Swift is the first one we really want to talk about. Moved him up a couple of spots, essentially ahead of Dalvin Cook and who? And Joe Mixon, who slid a little bit. I almost had... The reason I let Dalvin Cook slide is basically the matchup. I expect Philly to be able to put up points against Minnesota, and vice versa. I expect it to be more of a shootout, and this offense in Minnesota is different than it used to be. So I like Dalvin Cook in matchups where I'm expecting Minnesota to outright win the game, more so than in close matchups where I'm expecting a lot of points to be scored, where I'm expecting the offenses to have to throw the ball. So DeAndre Swift, it was tempting to even move him up more, but, he is in that timeshare there with Jamal Williams to some extent, as most running backs are in timeshares to some extent. Yeah, I like DeAndre Swift this week. Moving on to Nick Chubb. Have him up 2 spots here. Do still like the New York Jets as a good matchup. Moved him up ahead of Derrick Henry here a little bit because... I do have faith that Tennessee will want to establish the ground game, and of course I have faith in Derrick Henry as my number 4 preseason ranked running back, but just enough concerns with that Buffalo defense, with the potential for Buffalo getting out to a quick lead and Tennessee having to abandon that run to some extent, that I gave Nick Chubb the lead in that, these two against each other. For similar reasons to my concerns for Derrick Henry, I guess, Joe Mixon then slipped down here a couple of spots. You're starting all of these guys. On to Antonio Gibson. Here's one of the bigger jumps that I have here, 5 spots ahead of consensus. I like that matchup. I do think Washington-Detroit could be another sneaky, high-scoring-ish game for those two teams, so we'll see about that. But there is one concern that will come up when we cover J.D. McKissic as to how far I have Antonio Gibson up. I do believe last week was roughly Antonio Gibson's ceiling for these first 4 weeks, and then A-Rob will come in, and that'll probably be his ceiling going forward once... Did I call him A-Rob? Once B-Rob. Once Brian Robinson is back, then no longer will this be possible. But I expect another ceiling type game for Antonio, or I at least think it's possible enough that I like to move him up a few spots. Then Javonte Williams here, Leonard Fournette, Aaron Jones, nothing significant. Alvin Kamara do have a couple of spots behind. For me, the main concern is just that apparently he was a little bit hobbled last week, and that might have been a reasoning behind his less than stellar game against what was one of the best matchups in the run game last season. No, it's a new season, so things could change. But Tampa Bay was also good against the run. In the real world, apparently kind of more normal here as far as the season long went for them against fantasy points. You're playing Alvin Kamara anyways. Clyde Edwards-Helaire moved up 5 spots. I would feel comfortable playing him in this matchup. It was a good matchup despite last season. This week 1, the Los Angeles Chargers looked good against the run, but another game where it's more so the potential for the touchdowns and a lot of possessions and plays being called between these two. There's a lot of running backs who are middle of the road right now. So I guess depending on exactly how you feel about him, because I don't love James Conner this week. Do have him a couple spots behind, mostly just afraid of that Arizona offense not being excellent. And so, yeah, we'll see. I think he heavily relies on touchdowns. So until the Arizona offense is kicking, well, not kicking, until they're getting into the end zone, a little bit scary there. A.J. Dillon, expect him and Aaron Jones, maybe both to have even better weeks. I don't know. A little tough, but you're playing them both. Najee Harris slips here, and I initially wanted to move him up further, but I couldn't find much of a reason to put him over other guys. And that mostly comes down to this matchup against New England. Could be a low-scoring, ugly game there, so don't love it. And there is a bit of a injury concern from last week. Speaking of Leonard Fournette, slight injury concern. Wouldn't be the worst thing. It is a hamstring. That came up on Wednesday, so we'll see what Thursday looks like for him. Not overly concerned, but there is some mild concern there. And DeAndre Swift also showed up with, I believe, an ankle on Wednesday's report. He did that pretty much all of last season. There's always... I'm not concerned about him not playing this week. Cordero Patterson, have him highlighted here. A little bit just concerned about that match. That matchup, I guess, against the Los Angeles Rams there. But he does have that guaranteed usage there. Opportunity is king, so you can't deny that. Miles Sanders, I moved up a few spots. Once again, kind of a higher scoring matchup, expecting this to be a shootout. So I will take a guy in a shootout over a David Montgomery here in who knows what the Chicago-Green Bay game could look like. Might be ugly. Darrell Henderson have some question marks as to if what we saw last week is the true reality, or will Cam Akers get a third of the workload even compared to Darrell Henderson came through and pretty much had all of the workload. That is a good matchup there, so I will probably be firing Darrell Henderson up in my lineup, but that is partially because of how I drafted and waiting on some guys like B-Rob to get their butts on the field here and be in more full-time roles. So I'm rolling it. Travis Etienne moved up a little bit, I like him. J.K. Dobbins was unranked at the time. He had a full practice on Wednesday, so I'm actually feeling good about what kind of workload he might come into week 1. He's been kind of saying that he's healthy all off season. He's had less concern, I guess, about his health than the team has. So maybe he's coming in feeling good. I want to wait and hear more about that, though. I'm not confident with where I have him right now. Chase Edmonds, Damian Harris, nothing too crazy there. Did move Damian up a little bit compared to consensus. So Jeff Wilson, definitely not confident in this, but being against Seattle, I have to have some amount of confidence in that San Francisco run game, which has produced a lot of guys. Then we go to Devin Singletary, James Robinson, Michael Carter. Nothing really to say there. Melvin Gordon is a guy, I don't like having him behind all of these guys. We'll put him as a sleeper right now because of this matchup. Somewhere up around maybe 25 or so is as high as I could see ranking him this week, if that gives you a good idea of how much I don't like having him this low. Then Rashad Penny, I moved back quite a bit. Looks like Kenneth Walker will be playing this week. Have no clue what kind of workload he may or may not take away from Penny, but I'm not too confident in the matchup, in the offense, in the amount of opportunities. Anyways, a shared backload will allow these running backs So I'm just not loving it anymore, which is why I did not really want to draft Penny. But we will see. We will see. Maybe Kenneth Walker's not a concern this week. Also, pay attention to the news and what's coming out about those two to maybe bump him up or trust this ranking. Breece Hall, a lot of receptions. I got to see 10 more receptions again if he's going to have a total split with Michael Carter essentially being the leader of that split to a decent margin on the ground there. So, not confident yet, but have to trust a little bit of his opportunities from last week, and they're in a not terrible matchup. Jamal Williams, Rex Burkhead have them both ahead of consensus. That really just comes down to some of these guys that I have moved down in the consensus. And a fair amount of the movement from right about here, Jamal Williams on down, was helped determined by the snap shares from last week to move guys up and down against others. So Rex Burkhead, I don't. What can you do? I mean, he had like 70% of the workload, and there's some encouraging news that came out about Dameon Pierce from the head coach saying that he needs to get him more work. The thing is, like, last week was the perfect game plan for Dameon Pierce, and I don't know how many times Houston gets that kind of game plan. Really, part of where Rex Burkhead is up this high is that lackluster week 1 from Denver, but Denver could easily come out and be what we thought they would be right out of the gate next week. So we'll see. Just kind of balancing the goods and the negatives there. There's a lot of a balancing act between them, but in the end, I'll take Rex Burkhead over some of these guys this week because I do expect Denver should, get some sort of lead against Houston, which would put them in a passing situation, which is the situation where Rex Burkhead should make the field. Tony Pollard, don't love it, obviously. Moved him, had some guys jump ahead of him, essentially. Khalil Herbert had a jump 6 spots ahead of consensus. This may be a bit of a bold move. This is also just a bit of not trusting Dameon Pierce yet, in part because of that matchup. Don't know how that'll look. And then needing to see Cam Akers actually get what I'm concerned as far as a Darrell Henderson owner, thinking that he might get a chance of a 40% workload or something like that. But I need to see that first, and need to see him do well with it. But good matchup for him there for it. So I understand why why consensus has him a little higher. Ramondre Stevenson, I don't like the matchup this week once again. So and he had less of a snap share than Khalil Herbert. So just don't love that. Or at least opportunity share was in Khalil Herbert's favor there, which opportunity share can sometimes drive a snap share if they're doing good with those opportunities, and Khalil Herbert did do well with his opportunity enough. And then at J.D. McKissick, I have 44% over here. That is 44% of the snap share. He was on the field a fair bit, and the 63% snap share for Antonio Gibson is where I'm a little bit concerned with how highly I have him ranked this week. Once again, nice matchup here. So JD ends up falling in line with consensus, but that's really just because I have some of these guys jumped up. Ultimately, don't hate him this week as a sleeper kind of guy. Nyheim Hines only had like 25% of the snap share. This should be highlighted in red. Have him 4 spots behind consensus. He is who I thought he was, I guess. Kenneth Gainwell. Here's where I have Kenny Walker. Do expect him to come in and at least get like 30% of that snap share. So that should be enough to put him somewhere around these guys. Mark Ingram, good. He gets a good amount of work. He's just kind of a plotter at this point in his career, and decent real life defense against the run there. So yeah, Raheem Mostert, I'm waiting to be able to put him up higher in the rankings, but Baltimore run defense always a concern. And Kenyon Drake I do have behind consensus by a fair amount, and that is because I have J.K. Dobbins ranked where he wasn't for others. So he could probably fall out of here and get some other names up in here. I'll have to look around for any other names I want to add in. You're feeling comfortable with the first? you're pretty much starting up to the first 34 running backs there if you have only 2 of them. So after that's where the first question mark comes in, and then you start to really get concerned here around not too long later. Thank you very much for stopping in. Take care. I love you. We'll have more rankings videos coming up shortly.